Okay, how do you become a published author in the wild and crazy year of 2020? We can cover that in one video. Here we go. 10 tips that you can start doing today if you want to be a published author. Now, I'm not saving the best for last. The first tip is the most important. Stop saying you want to be a published author. You will be a published author. Seriously, say it out loud right now. I will be a published author. I know that might sound kind of arrogant or maybe even kind of hippy-dippy woo-woo, but look, I'm not telling you to sit around and meditate on this thing that you want and then one day Dan Brown's editor is gonna call and offer you a 7-figure deal. No, you're gonna work. You're gonna work really hard and maybe for a really, really long time. And that's why it's so important that right now you get into this mindset. I decided I wanted to write a book and get it published in 2007, and I had zero reason to believe that this was something I would be good at or something that was possible for me. I hadn't so much as written a short story and sent it to a magazine. I hadn't done anything. But I told myself it was going to happen. It was an inevitable thing that was in my future. I really believed it with my whole heart. I decided to write that book in 2007, and it didn't happen for me till 2014. I started writing a book, but I didn't finish it. I started writing another book and I finished it, but it didn't get an agent. I wrote another book and it got an agent, but it didn't get published. It took a really long time. And while I definitely got frustrated and depressed and even angry about all the obstacles that were being thrown at me, it was still just inevitable in my mind that it was going to happen. And here's the reason I think that that's so key, and I really want you to do it too. If you approach this as something that you're trying to get, that you want, that you're hoping for, then every time something happens to deny you that want, it's going to feel a little bit more unattainable. And at some point, if you start believing it's unattainable, then it's unattainable. But when you know this is going to happen for you, then you aren't trying anymore. You're preparing. All the work you do is preparation. And believing that the work you're doing is preparation is what's going to carry you through when you can't finish a draft, or when a beta reader points out a giant plot hole that means you have to start your book over from scratch, or when all those editor or agent rejections start pouring in, and on and on and on. You never hit that point where you think, well, the universe doesn't want me to be an author, I guess I should just give up. You just see all of them as opportunities to better prepare yourself for when it's actually going to happen. So one more time, say it right now. I will be a published author. Step number 2. Open yourself up to criticism now. There's this strange sort of irony that comes with writing and publishing a book, and this applies, doesn't matter if you're traditionally published or self-published. It takes kind of an extraordinary hubris to say, this made-up world and these characters that exist in my imagination are so amazing that people should pay me money for the privilege of consuming them for their own entertainment. But it also takes real humility to deal with the criticism and rejection that is always going to follow. You have to be supremely confident and genuinely humble to be an author. It's a really tough line to walk. So how do you start? That is step number 3. Find your support group. You're here on YouTube right now watching a video about writing. Do you watch a lot of videos about writing? Do you actually engage and leave comments and interact with other writers? Do you share your work and read their work? Or are you just lurking? There's nothing wrong with lurking at all. But if you can find a community somewhere on the internet or in real life that you feel comfortable opening up with and sharing your work with, please find it and join it as soon as you can. In 2007, when I started writing a book, I joined a forum called Absolute Write, which is still active, by the way, if you're looking for a ton of writers congregating in one place on the internet. I found my first critique group on AW. We ended up founding a blog together that was active for several years, and one of the co-founders and I ended up writing a middle grade series together that came out in 2018, over a decade later. And this all started when I said, I'm gonna write a book, and I hadn't written a scene yet, and I joined those forums. Telling the people in your life that you're writing a book can be a really weird experience because you don't know how they're going to react. I was really lucky in that my family and everyone I'm close to was very supportive from the beginning, but I know it's not always that way for everyone. And look, even if you have all the cheerleaders in the world, you still really need other authors who understand what you're going through. Because it's hard to tell people who aren't authors that a story is burning a hole in your brain and your characters won't stop talking to you and you can't focus on anything else without sounding kind of crazy. And you need someone to pop the virtual champagne cork with you when you get a full request from an agent, or when you get your first review on Amazon, or whatever milestone it is, because they'll actually understand just how big a deal that is. You also want to find a group that will give you honest feedback on your work, and you'll do the same for them. Giving and receiving feedback and criticism is going to help improve your writing chops exponentially. Step number 4, learn about your industry. Traditional publishing and self-publishing are very different, but whichever route you go, there are a ton of resources here on YouTube and out there in the great big interwebs to help you learn the ins and outs of how it all works. So start studying up now. Earlier this week, I came across an advertisement, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to publicly shame this person, but I think it's a really good example of what happens when you fail to do your research. This was an AdSense ad created by an aspiring author who claimed that their unpublished manuscript would factually generate millions in sales. They insulted literary agents for not seeing this, and then invited those agents out there who were savvy enough to see the potential to jump on that gravy train and contact them to offer representation. Okay, if you've ever done any research on how to query a literary agent, you understand why this is wild. But if you haven't done that, or you don't know much about querying, then I will let you in on the joke. Literary agents get literally thousands of queries a week, okay? And this is just one small part of their job, going through queries. They also go to conferences where they attend pitch sessions, which is where they sit one-on-one with dozens or even hundreds of aspiring authors who pitch their books to them, and then the agent has to either request to see pages from that book or reject them to their faces. This is emotionally draining and exhausting for everybody. And even then, agents will get approached in line at Starbucks, or waiting for the elevator, or literally in the bathroom by aspiring authors who want to pitch them their books. I'm talking sliding a manuscript under a stall door. It happens. Agents are just fielding pitches left and right 24/7. And they're not secretive about this, and they're not secretive about how they feel about the old slide your manuscript under the stall tactic. It doesn't work at all. It has the opposite intended effect. And if this person, this aspiring author, had spent 30 minutes Googling querying a literary agent, I am sure they would have realized that this expensive AdSense campaign would never, ever, ever work. If you are an author, and you are, because you told me you are, consider yourself an entrepreneur. No successful entrepreneur has ever jumped into an industry without doing her research first, right? So start doing your research now. Tip number 5, pay attention to trends. Look, hear me out. A piece of advice that I hear a lot is to ignore trends and write the book that you think is missing from the shelves. This advice is often given by really well-meaning and sincere agents and editors who then turn around and acquire the next girl on the train for like 7 figures. Trends matter if you want to sell books. Now, I'm 100% not telling you to go to the New York Times bestseller list and go to number 1 and say, well, guess I'm writing the next Southern historical murder book. No, please don't do that. The other thing is, I don't think writing the book you think is missing from the list or missing from the shelves is necessarily the best advice either. If you have an idea that genuinely has not been written before, then yes, please write it. But look, wizards existed before Harry Potter. Psychological thrillers with unreliable narrators existed before Gone Girl. Vampires existed before Twilight. Write the book you need to write. The one that you're so excited about that it keeps you up at night and makes you feel all buzzy tingly when you think about it. And then follow trends so that you know how to sell it. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, one of my friends and critique partners sent me a short story she wrote that was like first love during the early days of an apocalypse. And I read it and I was like, this is not a short story. This is the first chapter of a YA novel. Please, please, please write this novel so I can read it. And she did, and she got an agent and went on submission. Now, This was around the time when the Hunger Games movies were coming out and doing really well, and the Divergent books were out and those movies were in the works. So dystopian was huge, but the industry, the publishing industry, was already experiencing fatigue. And while apocalyptic fiction and dystopian are not the same genre, they're close enough that labeling her book that would have gotten her instant rejections from probably most editors, because they already had all the dystopians they wanted on their lists for the next several seasons. Now, my friend's book was nothing like those books, not just because it wasn't technically a dystopian, but the main character wasn't saving the world or taking down a corrupt government. She was just trying to survive in her small town while this huge, horrifying thing happened all over the world. So, her agent did something really clever. She pitched it as psychological horror. Now, this was accurate. The main character went through some seriously traumatic events in the book. She suffered hallucinations, she dealt with survivor's guilt, and the apocalyptic event itself was really bloody and really horrifying. The book absolutely fit into the genre of psychological horror. But as I know you know, trends rise and fall, and while dystopian was on its way down, psychological thrillers and horror were back on their way up. So that's how they pitched the book. She got an offer, and really pretty quickly, she wrote exactly the book she wanted to write, and it was a super original premise, and then used the current trends to figure out how to pitch it and rode the right wave. You don't have to sacrifice your art to satisfy the market. You just have to be savvy in how you pitch it. So stop telling yourself that no editor will ever buy your vampire romance, or frantically rushing through your rom-com draft because editors all have it at the top of their wish list right now and you want to strike while the iron's hot. People have been telling stories since the beginning of humanity. There is infinite room. Tip number 6, find a goal-setting method that works for you and set deadlines. I said that back in 2007, I started writing a book and I never finished it. I did not finish a draft of a book until I set a deadline for myself. And it's equally important to take your one big deadline and break it down into smaller, manageable deadlines. Write a novel is a huge, high-level goal. If that's all you're thinking about every time you sit down to write, then no matter how productive you are in your writing session, even if you wrote like 6,000 words, you're never gonna feel like it was quite enough because you didn't write a novel. You can set word count goals or page count goals or chapter goals, or maybe you wanna set goals that are more structure based, like I'm gonna write the inciting incident today, or I'm gonna start Act 3 tomorrow. Whatever you do, just break it down into smaller goals so that you can celebrate each milestone when you hit it. Also, keep it flexible. You can do the math and work out that if you write 1,500 words a day, you're gonna get to the end of your draft by this date. But let's be real, there's going to be days where you don't write 1,500 words. There are probably going to be days where you don't write any words, and that's okay. It definitely doesn't mean you have to double up and write 3,000 words the next day. When you set goals that way and then you start a session and you're already like starting from behind, that is the road to burnout. Here's what I do. Take a big goal, come up with a monthly goal, come up with weekly goals, come up with daily goals. I adjust the weekly goals at the start of every month and I adjust the daily goals at the start of every week. And I mentioned flexibility, I work some wiggle room into all of those goals. So for example, I'm drafting right now, and last week my goal was to write 1.5 chapters Tuesday through Friday. So 4 days of a chapter and a half on each day. But my weekly goal for last week was to write 5 chapters, not 6. That way, if I hit the daily goal every day, then hey, I'm ahead. But if Thursday I have a slow day and I only get half a chapter, then it's all good because I still hit my weekly goal. Either way, I feel positive and accomplished moving into the next week. Tip number 7, read with intention. I heard an author say once that when she's working on a book, at any step in the process, brainstorming, drafting, revising, copy editing, she can't read other novels, which to me would mean I never read novels. I don't understand that. I understand that some authors can't read in the genre they write in when they're writing a book in that genre, and I totally get that. And other authors want to absorb all of the fantasy or sci-fi or whatever that they can while they're drafting. Whatever works for you, just make sure you're still reading novels. And when you do, and your mind inevitably starts making those comparisons, their premise versus your premise, their character versus your character, their plot twists versus your plot twists, kindly and gently nudge those very harmful and negative thoughts aside and just pay attention to the prose. No, not the voice. Don't start comparing voices. Nudge it aside I mean, really just focus on the basics. When does this author use dialogue tags and when does she not? When does she use commas and when does she not? When does she use adverbs? When does she indent to a new paragraph? What do you like about it and what do you not like about it? I know this might sound ridiculous and super basic, and I'm really not trying to be condescending, but here's the deal. In the last 6 years, I've taught over 1,000 creative writing students, and I could not even tell you how many stories I've read. And I can tell within a few sentences when a writer reads a lot of books, not just for entertainment, but to emulate. And you know who else can tell? Editors, agents, and readers. I bet you can tell too. Have you ever flipped through the opening pages of a book on Amazon or wherever and you just got kind of an amateur vibe, like nothing super wrong that you could technically pinpoint, but it just didn't feel worth your money? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Yes, you can take a writing course and really dig into the nitty-gritty details of syntax and flow and all of that, but you can also just read voraciously and with intention. Side note, if you do want to get into those nitty-gritty details with your manuscript, but you don't have a critique partner yet and you don't want to pay for an online course or anything like that, there's actually a really cool resource that I'll link down below called AutoCrit. The free version lets you copy and paste or upload your book or your chapters or whatever inside, and it'll run automatic critiques for you on things like adverb usage or repetition or readability. And the premium version offers really advanced stuff like shifting verb tenses or POVs. Plus it has this really cool feature where you can compare your word choices against other books in your genre or even against specific authors like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. I would caution you against going too crazy with this, especially if you're in first draft mode. And actually, that brings me to my next tip. Tip number 8, embrace the crappy first draft. I know this seems like it contradicts my last tip a little bit, but look, you will revise. And by the time you get to that revision stage, all of those novels that you've been reading and absorbing, that's really going to start to pay off for you. But none of any of my advice so far, the reading, the intention, the goals, the research, the positive mentality, none of that matters if you don't have a draft. And all first drafts suck. When I say suck, I mean they're not ready to be published yet. You've dumped your sand in the sandbox or spread your puzzle pieces out on the table or got your lump of clay all ready to go, whatever metaphor works for you. Revision is the sandcastle, the finished puzzle, the beautiful sculpture. So when you're drafting, forget about those plot holes, leave that clunky description as it is, and just keep going till you get to the end. Tip number 9. Pick and choose the advice you actually take. You don't have to take it all, including the video you're watching right now. I like outlining. Does outlining make you feel constricted and uncreative? Then don't do it. Stephen King is a pantser. Pantsing is clearly a valid method. If you don't want to write every single day, then don't. Every writer's creative well refills in different ways and at different speeds. So take a break when you need to and don't let anyone shame you about it. Don't want to self-promote on social media all day to build your audience? That's okay, you don't have to. The truth is, we're all out here throwing around advice on how to write a book, how to get published, how to get more readers, and that's great and there's a lot of value in that, but there's no one true path to any of those things. There are many paths, so find the one that works best for you. And by the way, there's also a lot of just objectively bad writing advice out there, so please tell me the worst writing advice you've ever gotten down in the comments because I would really love to make a video about that sometime in the future. Last but not least, tip number 10. Recognize when productivity turns to procrastination. Is this the first video about writing you've watched today, or the second, or the 10th? It's so easy to start out doing something genuinely important to your preparation of when you will be a published author, like researching or brainstorming, and then just keep doing that for a few days or weeks or months because really you're just putting off doing the one thing that is absolutely essential to preparing for when you will be a published author, and that is writing your book. You'll know in your gut when it flips from productivity to procrastination. You can lie to everybody else, but don't lie to yourself. Now, if you've made it all the way to the end of this video, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I've got a freebie for you. Last week, author-tuber extraordinaire Alexa Dunn gave my video on outlining and my channel a little shout out, and within 24 hours I had like so many views on that video. Thank you, Alexa, and thank you all so much. That was awesome. I really loved reading the comments I got on the outlining video because I am an outliner. I love talking about plotting, could talk about plotting forever. Now, I mentioned before that I've taught a lot of creative writing workshops. So what I've done is I've taken a plotting lesson from one of my online courses that I taught last year, and I've turned it into a PDF that you can download for free, and the link is down below in the description. It talks a little bit more about coming up with a great elevator pitch and using trends to sell your book, overviews of several of the most popular plotting methods so you can find the right one for you, and an exercise you can do to start turning your premise into a plot. Finally, I know this is a super broad topic and all of the advice I just gave was really broad too. And that's why this is really just going to be episode 1 of a series of I don't know how many episodes about the basics of writing a book and the publishing process. I've started a playlist called How to Become a Published Author in 2020, so give that a follow if it sounds like something that might help you out. Also, I know the title of this video says in 2020, and I'm not trying to cheat you out of that. It is a little bit different now in 2020. So many things are different in this year than things were for me back in 2007 when I started out and in 2014 when my first book came out. That's another reason I really wanted to dive deep into this series and combine things I wish I had known back then with things I do know about the industry and the process of writing books now to help you on your journey now this year. But the basics of writing your book and getting through that first draft, having the positive mentality, finding your tribe, that will never change no matter what year it is. I really believe those are essential steps to your journey. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get notified every time I post a new video. And hey, didn't you tell me you will be a published author? So go write something. Go write it right now. Tip number 6. That is not a 6.